Welcome back. So this tutorial will cover, or will keep covering, cartridge development. In the past couple of tutorials, we talked about sort of general cartridge development. We talked about adding a recipe or load data, and we talked about adding performance or registering that we've shot this particular batch of ammo against a firearm and establishing cases and other powder projectiles and firearms relationships. So in this tutorial, we're going to take this a little bit further, and we're going to talk about load development in the sense of ladder testing, or how do I test, or how do I use the software to generate a report for ladder testing. And we'll also talk about some limitations, specifically why do we have a fired times fired offset number. So what I've done is I've created a separate case batch, 002, with 30 cases. It'll become apparent why I've done that, just to keep it clean. So we'll keep working on 357. I'll just clone this recipe and then I'll work off that. So let's say we have 357. Say we're going to test 13 grains of powder. We're going to add a different group. We're going to call this 357 development, because we want to group our recipes in its own group when we're working on ladder testing. We'll change our case to the new sort of clean batch. We'll say charge weight will be 13, I think it is, yep. And we'll say, well, we've loaded 10 cartridges. And we'll save. So we'll come back and we'll see it right here. So now what I want to do is I want to generate two more recipes, one at 14 grains and one at 15. Just working with extremes to make it easy to demonstrate. In reality, I'd be moving in much smaller quantities. So I'll create a copy and I'll create another copy. And what's important to note is that we actually have them grouped in their own group. And that will be very important in a second. So for expediency, I'll just use different tabs to open these recipes and quickly update them. So I'll say this one is 14 grains of powder and 10 cartridges. I'll save this one and I'll do the same for that one. Say 15 grains of powder and 10 cartridges, and we'll save that. So if we go back to we can close this now. We can go back to our cartridge development and we'll see that there's three recipes. They belong to this particular group and they use different charge weight. However, everything else about them is the same. So at this point, we can actually view the group rather than viewing a particular recipe. We can view the group where we have this set of recipes. And at this point, we'll assume that we're going to a shooting range and we want to generate we want to test this. So we're going to generate a ladder testing report. Now, because this is a software and we have lots of variables available to us, we can actually configure the report to different properties of the cartridge. So in our case, we're going to say that the base recipe is this one. All other recipes are identical with the difference of one particular variable. And in our case, it's the charge weight. We're going to generate this report. And we'll see that we can print this, we can put it in the ammo box, and we'll see that this marker field here is empty. And what it is, it's a physical thing. So once you've done this, you'll probably paint a cartridge red or blue or purple. And that's what I do with a Sharpie. And in here, I'll put a whatever color I've used, red, blue, or purple, in here, just to associate this document to this charge weight. to a physical cartridge. So I know that this 13 grain charge corresponds to some is painted red, and there'll be a little red mark in here. So I can relate physical to digital, if you will. And that's that. So at some point, we're going to go to a shooting range and we're going to shoot all of this. So once again, we'll open them and we'll add our performance data firearms already selected. Performance data will be, let's say, we've shot one group of 10, and we need to trigger it. So we'll set a date. We'll save that. You selected more cases than available. Well, yes, I have. Thank you. I'll do exactly the same here. We'll trigger our performance data. One group of 10. Update that. We'll probably come back here and fix it. I don't know why I got that error. Group shot 1, rounds per group 10. We're using the right batch. We've loaded the right amount of cartridges. I'll update this. Maybe I've selected something else. And we'll go to the next one and do exactly the same. And of course, while I'm doing it, I've just remembered that I don't actually have to do this, because if I leave this field blank, as long as I trigger the date and select the firearm, this value will be selected if I leave this fields blank, but I did it anyway, so here it is. So we can close this again, come back to our cartridge development view. We can view it here, or we can have a more convenient view in the group, and we'll see that all of this has been fired, so 30 rounds. If we go to our rifles, we'll see that Henry now has 40 rounds against it, which is correct. If we go to cases and look at 357, we'll see something a little bit weird, and that is times fired equals 3. So total used is correct. We've used all the cartridges there, and they've been returned back to the batch. 30, 30, and nothing used. Nothing is loaded as a cartridge. They're all cases again. But times fired is 3, but it actually should be 1. And that's because in cartridge development, we have 3 different recipes which operate on a batch as a whole. So if I'm going here and I'm selecting a batch, it is an expectation that I'm using a particular batch for a particular recipe. I'm not splitting my batches between recipes, which typically we never do, unless we are working up a load, in which case we'll actually use different recipes for different batches. And that's the exception to the rule. And that's a limitation of the software. So in cases, we'll actually see 3 recipes, which means 3 batches being fired once per recipe, and that's 3. While that's technically correct through the software, that's not actually correct, because we use the same batch in a load development recipe. So we can actually adjust this, and this is why we have set times fired offset to counter this exact situation, and that is load development recipes. So we can say, actually it's been fired twice, so -2. We'll set this, and now we're back to correct number. And we can always manipulate this. We can say 0 to return back to software generated value, or we can say I don't know, 7 to go up for some reason, I don't know why, or we can say -2 to actually correctly adjust our cases. And this is why we have this set times fired offset. And that's about it for ladder testing using groups, using offsets, and case tracking. So the next cartridge development tutorial will talk about these controls because they have pretty important meaning in cartridge development screens as opposed to other modules. And we'll talk about specifically archiving and deleting recipes. But for now, this is it.